What if the person who could destroy your billion-dollar empire was the same person who could save it? This is the true story of Maxwell Thompson, a tech billionaire who lost everything in broad daylight, and Ruth Kelly, a cleaning woman in a purple uniform, who held the one secret that could either bury him forever or rebuild his legacy from the ashes. A man too proud to see the help standing right in front of him. A woman too overlooked to be considered dangerous. And one impossible moment at high noon when their worlds collided and nothing would ever be the same. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why the most powerful people in any room are often the ones holding the mop. You'll see how one woman's stolen past became a billionaire's last chance at redemption. And you might just look twice at the person cleaning your office tonight. This is a story about truth that burns, credit that was stolen, and the kind of courage it takes to admit you built your empire on someone else's brilliance. Let me take you back to that afternoon in downtown Chicago, when the sun was high and merciless, and Maxwell Thompson's world started crumbling at the worst possible time, right when everyone was watching. Welcome back to everyone who's been riding with us. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is over there right now. I want to see how far this community reaches. You know, sometimes the universe has a way of humbling us in the most public places. Let me tell you about Maxwell Thompson, a man who thought he had mastered the game. You know what's interesting about privilege? It makes us blind. Let me tell you about Maxwell Thompson, who had every advantage in the world except the ability to see the truth standing right beside his desk. But before we go further into Maxwell's world, we need to understand the woman who was about to dismantle it, piece by careful piece. Ruth Kelly didn't look like a threat. That was her greatest advantage. At 12:22 p.m., while the trading floor buzzed with nervous recovery and Maxwell fielded calls from panicked board members, Ruth wheeled her cleaning cart into the glass-walled conference room he'd given her. The space was sterile, corporate, floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel exposed, a long table designed for people who spoke in quarterly projections. Ruth didn't waste time admiring the view. She unpinned her purple apron, laid it carefully across a chair like she was hanging up armor she might need again, and began transforming the space. The cleaning cart, the same one people had walked past for months without a second glance, became something else entirely. She lifted the false bottom, revealing a compact toolkit, USB drives, cable adapters, a portable drive encrypted 6 ways to Sunday. Within minutes, the side table became a forensics bench. Her laptop hummed to life, screens multiplying across the display as she pulled up system architectures that most of TQS's own engineers would struggle to navigate. That's when she heard the timid knock. A young woman stood in the doorway, South Asian, mid-20s, wearing an employee badge that read, Jia Patel, Junior Systems Engineer. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, like someone who'd learned to make herself small in rooms that didn't want her voice. Do you really want me here? Jia asked, her accent carrying the melody of someone who'd grown up between worlds. I mean, I'm not senior or anything. I want anyone who's been ignored long enough to be hungry, Ruth said, not looking up from her screen. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Pull me the pre-seed commits for the rollback primitive, the quantum secure layer. Go back 7 years. Jia blinked, surprised to be given real work, then rushed to a terminal. Her hands shook slightly as she typed. Within minutes, the commit history bloomed across Ruth's second screen, a tree of code contributions stretching back to TQS's earliest days. Ruth's breathing changed. Something wrong? Jia asked. Ruth leaned closer, her finger tracing a pattern on the screen. See those earliest commits? The foundational ones that everything else is built on? She zoomed in. They're not in your corporate patent stack. They're registered in a private lab repository. Someone shifted authorship before filing. Jia frowned, following the digital breadcrumbs. Who would even know to look there? Ruth's voice went quiet. Someone who wrote it. The room seemed to hold its breath. You? Gia whispered. Instead of answering, Ruth reached into her cart. Not the toolkit compartment, but a smaller pocket most people wouldn't notice. She pulled out a notebook, its corners soft with time and handling, pages yellowed and filled with handwritten code. The kind of artifact from an era when brilliant minds still thought with pen and paper before translating to screens. On the first page, written in careful script, R. Kelly, Quantum Rollback Protocol, Research Notes. I was Ruth Kelly then, she said, her voice steady despite the weight of memory. I contracted for a VC-funded incubator. Brilliant team, cutting-edge work. Then my husband got sick. She paused, thumb tracing the notebook's edge. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I had to leave mid-project to take care of Nate. Gia's eyes filled with understanding and horror. When I came back 8 months later, my name was gone from the commits. The VC's outside counsel said the authorship was in flux and needed to be consolidated under principal inventors for the term sheet to work. Ruth's jaw tightened. Principal inventors being whoever the money wanted history to remember. That's theft, Gia breathed. That's Tuesday in Silicon Valley, Ruth corrected. Not knowing is a choice dressed in speed. Everyone moves so fast, they don't have to see who they're stepping on. Listen, anyone who's ever had their work stolen or watched someone else take credit for what you built, comment, I see you right now. The people who've been invisible deserve to know they're not alone. She opened the notebook, revealing diagrams that matched, perfectly, undeniably, the core architecture that had made Thomson Quantum Systems possible. The breakthrough that launched a billion-dollar empire had been written in a dying man's hospital room, between chemo appointments and whispered prayers. Gia wiped her eyes. What are we going to do? Ruth's expression hardened into something focused and dangerous. We're going to prove it. Every claim we make. We anchor in evidence. She turned to her laptop. But first, we catch whoever's still trying to destroy this place. Her fingers danced across the keyboard. We're going to create a honeypot. A fake recovery wallet that looks like a privileged system fix. We'll document it as emergency infrastructure. Anyone who touches it will sign with their shadow credentials, badge through a door, leave time-synced fingerprints across every log. And then? Gia asked. Then we mirror everything to legal and audit in real time, and we create an off-site backup. Ruth's smile was thin but determined. We're starting something today, Gia. The Ruth Kelly Foundation. It doesn't exist yet, but it will. And it's going to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. Gia nodded, understanding she was witnessing something bigger than code. This was justice being architected one line at a time. Now we wait, Ruth said. She stood, rolled her shoulders, and picked up her purple apron. She tied it back on with practiced efficiency. You're going back out there? Gia asked, confused. To clean? Ruth smiled, picking up her cart. Work is work, sweetheart. And the best place to be invisible is exactly where people expect you. She wheeled the cart toward the door, then paused. The honeypot goes live in 5 minutes. Anyone who touches it during market hours will know exactly who they are. As Ruth disappeared back onto the trading floor, just another cleaning woman pushing her cart past people too busy to notice her, Gia stared at the screens. Somewhere in this building, a traitor was about to make a fatal mistake. And 2 women everyone had overlooked were about to prove that being invisible was the most dangerous thing you could be. The ping came at 1:17 p.m., sharp and precise as a knife sliding between ribs. Ruth was at the edge of the trading floor, emptying a trash bin that didn't need emptying, when her phone buzzed against her hip. She didn't react, didn't break the rhythm of her movements. To anyone watching, she was just another cleaner doing invisible work in a building full of important people. But her heart kicked hard against her chest. She finished with the trash, wheeled her cart casually toward the glass hive, and slipped inside. Gia was already at the laptop, her face pale in the monitor glow. "It tripped," Gia whispered. "Someone accessed the honeypot." Ruth moved beside her, eyes scanning the cascade of data flooding the screen. Honey access, admin 03. The timestamp glowed, 1:16:47 p.m. "Split the feeds," Ruth said, her voice calm despite the electricity crackling through her veins. "Keystroke capture, screen mirror, badge logs. I want to see everything." Gia's fingers flew. The display fractured into multiple windows, a digital dissection of whoever had just made the fatal mistake of touching what they shouldn't. The keystroke logger showed careful, deliberate commands. Someone who knew the system. The screen mirror revealed a terminal session running from an office with floor-to-ceiling windows, lake view, afternoon sun glinting off water like scattered coins, and the badge log pinged a door on the executive corridor, 37th floor, northwest corner. Ruth's stomach tightened. She knew that office. "Cross-reference the admin credentials with the badge timestamp," she said quietly. Gia pulled up the authentication records. The screen refreshed, and a name appeared beside the admin 03 designation. Victor Hale, Chief Operating Officer. The two women stared at each other. Saying it out loud would make it real, and real meant dangerous. "Lock everything," Ruth instructed. "Mirror the feeds to legal and audit. Offsite backup to the Kelly Foundation bucket. Timestamp every packet." "On it," Gia said, her hands already moving. Ruth turned toward the glass wall that separated them from the trading floor. Through the transparency, she could see people moving, phones pressed to ears, screens glowing with numbers that measured worth in ways that had nothing to do with truth. And then she saw him. Victor Hale emerged from the executive corridor, sleeves rolled to his elbows in that calculated casual way that cost $1,000 to look effortless. His smile was camera-ready, the kind that had closed deals and charmed investors. He moved through the floor like he owned it, because in many ways he thought he did. He was walking straight toward the glass hive. Ruth's phone buzzed. She glanced down. A text from Maxwell. "Board vote moved to 2:45. Something's wrong. Be careful." Before she could process it, another message appeared. "Unknown number. Stop digging or you'll regret it." Ruth's jaw clenched. She pocketed the phone and straightened her purple apron, her hands steady despite the threat burning in her palm. Victor appeared in the doorway, his smile bright as polished silver. "Ruth," he said, his voice warm, friendly, the tone of someone who'd never had to fight for anything. "Still working? You're going to burn yourself out." "Just finishing up some system documentation," Ruth replied, positioning herself between Victor and the laptop where Gia sat frozen. "What brings you down from the executive floor?" "Oh, just checking on our new star employee." He took a step inside, hands in his pockets, eyes sweeping the room with practiced casualness. But Ruth saw the calculation behind the charm, the way his gaze lingered on the screens, trying to read what they couldn't quite see from that angle. "You've really made quite the impression around here. David's new favorite." "I'm just doing my job," Ruth said evenly. "Your job." Victor repeated the word slowly, and now his smile had an edge sharp enough to cut. "Interesting how your job seems to involve investigating systems and access patterns, almost like you're looking for something, or someone." The air in the room shifted, pressure building like a storm about to break. "Just making sure the security infrastructure is sound," Ruth replied, her voice steady as stone. "After what happened this morning, we can't be too careful." "No," Victor agreed, still smiling. "We certainly can't." He took another step forward, close enough now that Ruth could smell his cologne. Expensive, aggressive. "You know, Ruth, rooms like these have long memories. People who've been here for years, who've built this company from the ground up." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "They don't always appreciate outsiders asking questions about things that don't concern them." Behind Ruth, Gia's breathing had gone shallow. Ruth met Victor's eyes, refusing to look away. Then maybe they shouldn't have left doors open that invited questions. For just a moment, a heartbeat, a breath, Victor's mask slipped. His eyes went cold, flat, the warmth draining out like water from a cracked glass. Then the smile returned, but it didn't reach anywhere near his eyes anymore. "Be careful, Ruth," he said softly. "This building is full of sharp edges. It would be unfortunate if you got cut." He turned and walked out, his footsteps steady, unhurried. A man who believed he still controlled the board and the angles. Anyone who's ever been threatened for telling the truth, comment "Truth wins" below. Show the victors of the world that silence isn't an option anymore. Ruth watched him go, her pulse hammering in her ears. She waited until he disappeared around the corner, then turned to Gia. "Tell me you got that." Gia's face was pale but determined. Every word, audio and visual, time-stamped and backed up. Ruth pulled out her phone and stared at the anonymous threat still glowing on her screen. They were scared. Scared people made mistakes. "Keep monitoring his office feed," Ruth said. "Anything he touches, any authentication, any badge access, I want to know immediately." Gia nodded, then hesitated. "Ruth, what happens when he knows we're watching him?" Ruth looked at the screens. At the digital trail Victor Hale had left scattered across their systems like breadcrumbs leading straight to his guilt. On one monitor, the camera feed from the executive corridor showed Victor entering his office, the one with the lake view. "Then he'll make a mistake trying to cover his tracks," Ruth said quietly. "And we'll be there to document every single one." On the screen, Victor Hale sat down at his desk. He reached for his keyboard. And his biometric authentication lit up like a flare in the darkness, confirming what they both already knew. The enemy wasn't coming from outside. He'd been inside all along. Maxwell Thompson stood alone in Conference Room C, watching his past play on loop. The presentation cycled through old investor decks, photos of a younger version of himself, hoodie and stubble, standing in a garage that smelled like ambition and coffee. The narrative was clean, compelling. Brilliant founder builds quantum security empire from scratch. The American dream rendered in slides and stock options. He'd told that story so many times he'd almost believed it himself. The city stretched beyond the windows, bright and indifferent. Chicago at 1:46 p.m. didn't care about his crisis. Lunch crowds filled the streets. Sunlight bounced off glass towers. The world kept spinning, whether his empire burned or not. He heard the door open behind him, heard the soft rustle of fabric. He didn't need to turn to know it was Ruth. He'd started recognizing the rhythm of her footsteps, the particular way she moved through space. Efficient, purposeful, never taking more room than she needed. "Before we go any further," Ruth said quietly, "you need to know what you're actually saving." Maxwell turned. She stood just inside the doorway, still wearing the purple uniform. And in her hands, she held that beaten notebook, the one with her name written in careful script on the first page. She walked to the conference table and set it down between them like evidence in a trial that hadn't started yet. "I need to tell you about Nate," she began, and her voice carried the particular steadiness of someone who'd learned to speak through grief without letting it swallow them whole. "My husband. He used to whistle from the kitchen when a line of code finally compiled. This little victory song." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He was the one who encouraged me to take the incubator contract. Said I was too brilliant to stay small." Maxwell sat down across from her, listening. "The VC fund was everything we'd dreamed about. Cutting-edge work, smart people, the chance to build something that mattered." Ruth opened the notebook, revealing pages dense with diagrams and equations. I developed the quantum rollback primitive in 6 months, the foundation of everything your company does. And then Nate got his diagnosis. Her finger traced the edge of a page. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave him a year, maybe 18 months in the best case. I had to leave. But I told them I'd be back. I sent updates from the hospital. I thought we were partners. What happened? Maxwell asked, though he could already feel the shape of the answer forming like a stone in his chest. I got an email, Ruth said. Very professional. Very polite. It said they appreciated my contribution, but the patent strategy required authorship consolidation under principal inventors. My name was removed from the commits, reassigned. When I pushed back, they stopped responding. And then Nate's medical bills started coming. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Her voice remained steady, but Maxwell could see the cost of that steadiness. I had to choose between fighting for credit and keeping my husband alive. Maxwell felt something cold and shameful spreading through his chest. The incubator was funded by the same VC syndicate that backed your Series A, Ruth finished. Your first patent, the one that made everything else possible, sits on my primitive, my code, my nights in that hospital room while Nate slept, trying to solve problems that would make someone else rich. The silence stretched between them, heavy with truth. I didn't know, Maxwell said, and the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Ruth's expression was kind but unyielding. Sometimes not knowing is a choice dressed in speed. Everyone moving so fast they don't have to see who they're stepping on. Maxwell looked at the notebook, at the city beyond the glass, at the founder photos still looping on the screen. His face, his name, his story. All of it built on a foundation that belonged to someone else. His phone lit up on the table. PR in 10. Board in 15. Markets jittery. Needs statement. He stared at the messages, feeling the weight of what Ruth was offering him. Not just the truth about his company's origins, but a choice about what kind of man he wanted to be. The primitive is yours. I believe you, and I'll put your name where it belongs, Maxwell said, his voice rough with something that might have been fear or might have been relief, even when it burns everything I've built. Ruth studied him for a long moment, and he understood she was measuring whether he meant it, whether his words were just another story he'd tell himself to sleep at night. It might destroy us, he continued. The board will panic, investors will run, the media will eviscerate me. He met her eyes. But I'd rather lose everything than keep living a lie. Something shifted in Ruth's expression. Not quite trust, but the possibility of it. Then you'll know what I knew, she said softly. What it feels like to lose everything and have to rebuild from truth instead of myth. And maybe, when we're lucky, we'll build something better. Maxwell's phone buzzed again. Board convening early. 2:45. Be ready. He looked at Ruth. How do we do this? We do it your way for the public, she said, but we do it my way for the systems. We stabilize the company first, expose the traitor second, tell the truth third, in that order. We do it your way, Maxwell agreed. He stood, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. All of it. Ruth picked up her notebook, holding it like the weapon it had become. Then let's go to the SOC. We've got a ledger to save and a board meeting to survive. They walked out of that conference room together, billionaire and cleaner, founder and ghost author, heading toward the glass-walled nerve center where the company's heartbeat lived in server racks and blinking lights. The calendar on Maxwell's phone flipped to 2:00 p.m. 45 minutes until the board tried to take everything away. And somewhere in the building, Victor Hale was preparing his own version of the truth. But for the first time since the attack began, Maxwell Thompson wasn't walking alone. The Security Operations Center at 2:03 p.m. was a cathedral of glass and wire, bathed in the kind of sunlight that made secrets impossible. Ruth stood at the primary console, purple uniform stark against the sterile white of the SOC. Around her, the floor had gone silent. Traders frozen mid-keystroke. Analysts with phones pressed to ears, but no words coming out. Everyone watching the screens like they were monitoring a heart that had stopped beating. "Shadow Ledger is online," Gia called from the secondary station, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Grafting in 3, 2. Ruth's fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision. This wasn't coding anymore. This was surgery on a living system, billions of dollars balanced on the edge of her every command. The main display showed two parallel realities: the corrupted ledger bleeding red errors, and the shadow copy she'd been building since morning. Clean, verified, every transaction accounted for. "Initiating state transfer," Ruth announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Transparency was the only currency that mattered now. "When this works, we'll have complete rollback. When it fails—" "It won't fail," Maxwell said from behind her. He'd taken off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, standing among the engineers like he was one of them instead of the man whose empire hung in the balance. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 30%. 45. Every second felt like an hour. The senior SOC engineer broke the silence. "State validation, holding steady." 60%. A trader whispered, "Jesus Christ, it's actually working." 75. Ruth's phone buzzed against her hip, another anonymous threat, another promise of consequences. She didn't even look. 89%. The room held its breath, and then, like dawn breaking after the longest night, state reversed. Ledger clean. The trading floor erupted. Cheers, applause, someone actually crying with relief. The analysts were already on their phones, spreading word that TQS had just pulled off the impossible. But Ruth didn't celebrate. She stepped away from the console, her expression hard as stone, and turned to face Maxwell. "Now we tell the truth," she said quietly, cutting through the celebration like a blade. The room went silent again. Maxwell nodded slowly. "Call legal and audit. Get them in here now." Within minutes, the glass walls of the SOC became a war room. Outside counsel materialized with laptops and recording devices. The compliance lead looked pale but determined. Maxwell stood at the head of the table, and for the first time since Ruth had met him, he looked like someone ready to stop running from his own story. "Document everything," Maxwell instructed. "The breach timeline, Ruth's intervention, the shadow ledger recovery, and—" He paused, glancing at Ruth. "Begin preparing a public statement. No spin, no PR softening. Just the truth about who saved this company and why her name should have been on the patents from the beginning." The PR lead started to object. "Maxwell, we should workshop the messaging." "No," he said firmly. "We're done workshopping truth. Draft it clean. We go live at 3 p.m. That's when Gia's voice cut through from the forensics station, sharp with urgency. "Ruth, you need to see this." Ruth crossed to the monitor. The honeypot logs glowed accusatory in the afternoon light. "Honey access, admin 03. Timestamp, 2:11:34 p.m. Badge, V. Hale. Exec corridor. Biometric, confirmed." Victor Hale had just touched the trap again. Time-synced, signed, undeniable. Ruth's jaw clenched. He's making another move, right now. Maxwell's phone lit up. Board convening. 2:45. Victor called emergency vote. Says you're compromised. The room seemed to tilt. 40 minutes until the board tried to end everything. Ruth locked eyes with Maxwell. "He's going to use the board meeting to flip the narrative. Claim you're unstable, that the breach was your fault. That he's the steady hand needed to save the company. Then we bring the evidence with us," Maxwell said. He turned to the building security chief who'd appeared in the doorway. "I need you at that board meeting, and I need you ready to detain an executive when I give the signal." The security chief's expression didn't change. On whose authority? Mine, Maxwell said. While I'm still CEO, and on the authority of time-stamped forensic evidence that will hold up in any court in the country. Ruth pulled the evidence files, encrypted and backed up across 3 jurisdictions. The digital trail was perfect, damning, complete. Print the badge logs, Ruth instructed. I want physical copies, and send the full packet to legal, audit, and the board members' personal emails right now. Before we walk into that room. As Gia executed the commands, Ruth felt the weight of what came next settling over her shoulders. They'd saved the ledger. Now they had to save the truth. Maxwell checked his watch. 2:18 p.m. 27 minutes until high noon in the boardroom. And somewhere above them, Victor Hale was preparing his own version of salvation, not knowing that every keystroke, every badge swipe, every shadow authentication had already signed his confession in light that couldn't be erased. The sunlight through the SOC windows was merciless and bright. Perfect conditions for evidence that refused to hide. The boardroom at 2:45 p.m. was all dark wood and expensive silence. Blinds half drawn so that sunlight fell in stripes across the table like prison bars. Maxwell took his seat at the head. Ruth stood against the back wall in her purple uniform, holding a tablet with evidence that could end careers. The board members watched her with the particular discomfort of people who'd never had to acknowledge the help before. Victor sat 3 seats down, impeccable in his tailored suit, wearing the expression of a man who'd already won. The outside counsel, gray-haired, expensive, hired by the board's audit committee, cleared his throat. Given this morning's catastrophic breach and the ongoing volatility, the committee believes a leadership transition is necessary. Mr. Thompson has demonstrated instability, Maxwell finished. His voice was quiet, dangerous. That's the word you're going with? The company nearly collapsed under your watch, Victor interjected smoothly. We're all grateful for your vision, Maxwell. But vision without execution is just, let me show you execution, Maxwell said. He nodded to Ruth. She touched the tablet. The boardroom's main screen came alive. The first feed showed terminal commands. Careful, deliberate, damning. The timestamp glowed in the corner. 1:16:47 p.m. This is a honeypot wallet, Ruth explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years being underestimated. We created it as bait this morning. It's designed to look like emergency infrastructure. Anyone touching it would leave a complete digital signature. The second feed appeared. Badge access logs, building security footage, a door opening on the executive corridor. Victor Hale, rolling his sleeves, checking his watch, entering his corner office. 1:16:45 p.m., 2 seconds before the honeypot was accessed. The geographic correlation, Victor started, but his voice had lost its polish. Ruth pulled up the third feed, a screen mirror from Victor's office. His terminal. His commands. The Lakeview window unmistakable in the reflection on his monitor. Biometric authentication, Ruth continued, zooming in on the login signature. Fingerprint plus retinal. Time-synced packets signed with your shadow credentials and sealed in a cryptographic tunnel. Every keystroke logged. Every authentication verified. The room had gone absolutely still. This could be spoofed, Victor said, but the words came out hollow. Screen sharing. Remote access. Signed packets don't lie, Ruth cut him off. We've got your physical presence via badge, your biometric authentication, and your terminal commands all synchronized to the microsecond. 3 independent verification systems, all captured in real time and mirrored to legal, audit, and external counsel. She pulled up one final screen, the honeypot access log from 2:11 p.m. And you touched it again, 43 minutes ago, because you thought you were still in control. Maxwell stood. You've been feeding information to Atlas Meridian, sabotaging our systems, trying to crash the valuation so they could force a hostile takeover. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. And you plan to position yourself as the savior, the steady hand to replace the unstable founder. Victor's jaw worked. His eyes darted to the door, to the board members who were staring at him like they'd never seen him before, to the screens that showed his guilt in 3 different angles. The evidence is already with the prosecutors, Maxwell added quietly. This meeting is just courtesy. The boardroom door opened. Building security, 2 officers, professional, implacable, stood in the threshold. Victor rose slowly, adjusting his cuffs with hands that trembled just slightly. I'd like to leave with dignity. You should have thought about that before you tried to burn down what other people built, Maxwell said, but he nodded to security. Let him walk out the front. No cuffs, yet. Victor moved toward the door, and for just a moment, he paused beside Ruth. You should have stayed invisible, he whispered. Ruth met his eyes. That's what you all counted on. Security escorted him out. The door closed with a sound like a coffin lid. People who betray trust always think they're untouchable, until the evidence speaks. Comment. Receipts don't lie below, and let's show the world what accountability looks like. The board members sat in stunned silence. The audit committee counsel looked like he'd swallowed glass. Finally, the board chair, a silver-haired woman who'd made billions in semiconductor manufacturing, spoke. We need time to process this. Meeting paused until 3:15. We won't be here at 3:15, Maxwell said. The words landed like stones in still water. Excuse me? Ruth and I will be with the press at 3 o'clock. Maxwell checked his watch. 13 minutes. We're making a statement about what happened today. All of it. The breach, the recovery, and the truth about who built the foundation this company stands on. Gasps rippled around the table. Maxwell, you can't, the counsel started. I can and I will, Maxwell said. He looked at Ruth. We both will. He turned and walked toward the door. Ruth followed, the tablet still glowing with evidence in her hands. As they stepped into the corridor, the afternoon sun hit them full force through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Down the hall, through the glass walls that separated private from public, they could see them. Cameras on tripods, reporters with microphones, lights bright as judgment. The press corps was waiting. Maxwell's phone buzzed. PR says we need talking points. What's the message? He typed back, the truth. No filter. Ruth stood beside him, purple uniform and all, holding the proof that would rewrite history. Ready? Maxwell asked. Ruth looked at the cameras, at the sunlight, at the moment that would either destroy them or set them free. Let's go, she said. They walked forward together into the light that forgave nothing and forgot even less. The press floor at 3:00 p.m. was a circus of glass and ambition, cameras on every angle, ticker symbols crawling across screens like digital heartbeats, red recording lights blinking like tiny accusatory eyes. Maxwell stood at the podium, Ruth beside him in her purple uniform, and for a moment the only sound was the mechanical click of camera shutters. At 11:47 this morning, Maxwell began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Thomson Quantum Systems suffered a coordinated breach of our quantum-secured ledger. By noon, we'd lost access to our core infrastructure. He paused. By 2:03 p.m., it was restored, completely, because of the woman standing next to me. Murmurs rippled through the press corps. Ruth Kelly, who many of you assumed was part of our cleaning staff, is actually one of the most brilliant security architects I've ever encountered. She built a shadow ledger, trapped the insider saboteur, and saved this company from collapse. A reporter shouted, "Who was the insider?" Victor Hale, our COO. He's been detained. Evidence is with prosecutors. That's all I can say about ongoing criminal proceedings. Maxwell's jaw tightened. But that's not why we're here. The room went quiet, sensing something bigger coming. Maxwell reached down and lifted Ruth's notebook, worn, yellowed, filled with handwritten genius. He held it up like evidence at a trial. This notebook contains the original research for the quantum rollback primitive, the foundation of every patent, every product, every dollar this company has ever made. His voice cracked slightly. It was written 7 years ago by Ruth Kelly while her husband was dying of pancreatic cancer, and her name was systematically erased from the authorship. You could have heard a pin drop. The VC incubator that developed the early research, the same syndicate that backed our Series A, reassigned credit to consolidate authorship under principal inventors, which meant whoever the money wanted history to remember. Maxwell set the notebook down gently. I didn't know. I should have. But not knowing was a choice dressed in speed. And I'm done pretending speed excuses theft. He pulled out a document, hands shaking. I'm announcing the following, effective immediately. Ruth Kelly is appointed Chief Security and Protocols Architect of Thomson Quantum Systems. She will receive full co-author credit on all patents derived from her primitive. We're establishing a revenue share that will fund the Ruth Kelly Foundation, an organization dedicated to ensuring overlooked inventors, especially women and people of color, never have their work stolen again. The reporters erupted with questions, but Maxwell held up his hand. We're commissioning an independent audit of all authorship claims across our IP stack. Where credit was stolen or obscured, it will be restored, publicly, with compensation. He looked at Ruth. This company was built on someone else's brilliance. It's time we admitted that and made it right. A reporter from the Financial Times stood. Mr. Thompson, are you resigning? Maxwell's laugh was sharp, almost bitter. I'm redefining what leading means. When the board votes me out for choosing truth over mythology, then I'll go, but I won't lead a lie anymore. Another voice, a young woman from TechCrunch. Ms. Kelly, how does it feel to finally be seen? Ruth stepped to the microphone. The room held its breath. Like daylight, she said quietly. Bright, unforgiving, necessary. She looked out at the cameras, at the reporters who'd walked past her 100 times without seeing her. I spent years being invisible. That invisibility almost let this company burn. But it also gave me the freedom to see what everyone else missed. That the most dangerous place to hide a lie is in broad daylight, where people are too busy to look. On the screens behind them, the stock ticker stuttered. TQS shares dropped 7%. 8. 10. Then something strange happened. The fall slowed, steadied. Trading volume spiked, not panic selling, but something else. Buyers stepping in. The ticker crawled back, down 8%. 7. 6, and holding. A CNBC anchor's voice cut through the room's speakers. Unprecedented transparency from Thomson Quantum Systems. Market responding to integrity play. Institutional investors appear to be holding? Maxwell's phone lit up with messages. Client consortium. Standing with you. This took guts. Rival CEO. You just did something I've never seen. Respect. Major investor. Hell of a risk, but it's the right kind of risk. But not everyone was celebrating. The next message made Maxwell's stomach drop. Legal. Atlas Meridian filing suit. Tortious interference. They're claiming we manufactured evidence against Victor. More incoming. Then another. DOJ source. Arrest warrant for Victor Hale imminent. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Ruth saw Maxwell's face go pale. What is it? He showed her the messages. The storm's just starting. Atlas is coming after us. There'll be lawsuits, depositions, discovery. They're going to try to bury us in litigation. Ruth looked at the cameras, at the reporters still shouting questions, at the ticker that had stabilized but not recovered. Then we fight in the daylight, same place we told the truth. Maxwell nodded slowly. Can we survive this? I don't know, Ruth admitted, but I'd rather burn fighting for truth than thrive on a lie. A reporter's voice cut through. Ms. Kelly, do you regret waiting so long to come forward? Ruth considered the question, thinking of Nate, of hospital rooms and medical bills, of years spent invisible while her work made others rich. I regret that the system made me choose between credit and survival, she said finally. But I don't regret surviving, and I don't regret what happens next. Listen closely. Everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet, to wait your turn, to not make waves, comment, "My turn now" below. The world needs to hear from people who refuse to stay silent. She stepped back from the podium, and Maxwell followed. As they walked off the press floor, the questions continued behind them. A roar of voices demanding answers, angles, the next chapter of a story that was just beginning. The afternoon sun cut through the building's glass walls, turning everything to light and shadow. Somewhere, lawyers were preparing briefs. Prosecutors were building cases. Rivals were sharpening knives. But for now, in this moment, the truth was out. And it was unforgiving. Necessary. Bright. 6 weeks later, the building looked the same, but felt different. Like a bone that had broken and healed stronger in the mending. Ruth's office had a door, but she never closed it. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the trading floor. No blinds, no privacy. Everything visible. A deliberate choice. Transparency as architecture. She sat at her desk reviewing code submissions when Maria from night shift operations appeared in the doorway, hesitant. You said your door was open for anyone? I meant it, Ruth replied, looking up. What do you need? I have an idea, for the ledger verification protocol, but I'm just ops. I didn't go to MIT or Stanford or... Ruth held up a hand. Show me the idea, not your credentials. The work speaks or it doesn't. Maria's face transformed. She pulled out a tablet, hands shaking slightly, and began explaining a recursive validation pattern that made Ruth sit back and actually smile. This is excellent, Ruth said. How long have you been sitting on this? 2 years. Nobody would listen. Ruth thought of hospital rooms, of notebooks that gathered dust while others took credit. They're listening now. Send it to the Kelly protocol team. Tell them I said to prioritize it. After Maria left, Gia appeared with coffee and updates. Legal says Atlas Meridian's board is imploding. SEC investigation. Civil suits from their own investors. They're trying to blame everything on Victor, but the transaction logs don't lie. Ruth accepted the coffee. And our board? 3 resignations. The ones who pushed for Maxwell's removal. Gia pulled up her tablet. They're being replaced by people who actually understand what happened. One of them is Dr. Sarah Chen. She testified about IP theft in the pharmaceutical industry. She gets it. Through the glass walls, Ruth could see the trading floor. Busy, alive, but different now. More heads of color, more women, more people who looked like they'd fought to be in the room. Maxwell had opened the hiring to a blind review process. Credentials still mattered, but so did ideas. The Kelly Protocol Suite is almost ready for release, Gia continued. Open source, quantum resistant, fully verifiable. The documentation team asked what you want in the manifesto. Ruth turned to her notebook, not the old one with Nate's memory pressed into every page, but a new one. She flipped to a page where she'd written in careful script, "If they won't hear you, write in proof." "Put that," she said, "and credit every contributor by name. No consolidation, no erasure." Down on the executive floor, Maxwell stood in what used to be Victor's corner office. They'd gutted it, removed the expensive furniture, the Lakeview ego, the trappings of power that had hidden rot underneath. Now it was a collaboration space, glass walls, open seating. Maxwell pulled out his phone and opened the company forum. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m., he held an AMA, Ask Me Anything, where any employee could submit questions. No PR filter, no approved talking points. Today's top question: do you regret the confession? He typed, I regret that it took a crisis to make me choose truth. But I don't regret the choice. This company is stronger because we stopped pretending. Another question: will you publish the old cap tables? Show who really owned what. Maxwell hesitated, then typed, yes, next week, all of it. His chief counsel would have a stroke. His remaining board members would panic. But he'd learned that sunlight was the only disinfectant that actually worked. He rode the elevator alone that afternoon. No security detail, no executive privilege. A junior analyst got on at the 23rd floor, looked at him nervously, then said, thank you for what you did. My sister's an engineer. She shows people your press conference when they tell her to stay quiet about stolen ideas. Maxwell nodded, throat tight. Tell her to never stay quiet, and when she needs backing, she's got mine. The dedication ceremony happened on a Thursday, 63 days after the breach. The former executive corridor had been converted into the Kelly-Thompson Protocol Lab, a research space for security innovation, named in alphabetical order because Ruth insisted. They'd framed her purple uniform behind glass in the entrance, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Beneath it, a brass plaque. Credit is security. Security is truth. Ruth stood beside Maxwell as employees filed through, touching the glass, reading the plaque, understanding that visibility could be armor when you wore it right. You should have top billing, Maxwell said quietly. Kelly before Thompson. Alphabetical is fine, Ruth replied. What matters is that both names are there, and that we earned them. Gia appeared, tablet glowing with urgent news. Grand jury just convened. Victor's being indicted. Wire fraud, conspiracy, trade secret theft. 17 counts. Maxwell's phone buzzed. Media requesting statement. Markets jittery. Verdict could move stock. Ruth saw his expression tighten. You worried? The hearing's tomorrow, Maxwell said. When they drag this out, when Victor's lawyers make us look incompetent or vindictive, he trailed off. We've come so far. One bad news cycle could undo it all. Ruth looked at the purple uniform behind glass, at the lab full of people who'd been overlooked and were now building the future, at the truth they'd chosen even when it hurt. Then we tell the same story we told at 3 o'clock, she said. The truth. In daylight. Let the verdict speak for itself. Maxwell nodded, but his hands were shaking slightly. Tomorrow would determine whether justice was just theater or something real. Through the windows, the sun was setting over Chicago, painting the glass towers gold and crimson. Beautiful and unforgiving. The kind of light that revealed everything, whether you were ready or not. The morning after the verdict came down, guilty on all 17 counts, the trading floor was quieter than it had been in months. Not the silence of fear, but something closer to peace. Ruth stood in the Kelly-Thompson Protocol Lab as early light slanted through the windows, turning dust motes into constellations. Gia arrived at 7:47 a.m., carrying 2 coffees and wearing an expression that suggested she hadn't slept. Director of Transparent Systems, Ruth said, holding up the official announcement. Congratulations. Gia's eyes went wide. I'm only 26. I don't have the experience. You have the instinct, Ruth interrupted. And the courage to use it when it matters. She reached into her desk and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a silver pin shaped like a wrench, delicate but unmistakable. Engineering tradition. My mentor gave me one before Nate got sick. Now I'm giving you yours. Gia's hands trembled as Ruth pinned it to her lapel. What does it mean? That you fix things that are broken, Ruth said simply. Even when people tell you they're supposed to work that way. Through the glass walls, Maxwell appeared, gesturing them toward the conference room. Inside, The compliance team had laid out the quarter's reports. The numbers told a story Ruth hadn't dared hope for. Client retention, 94%. 3 major institutional investors had not only stayed, but increased their positions. Universities were teaching case studies called the Kelly Correction, examining how stolen credit weakens systems and how restoration strengthens them. "They're choosing us because of the confession," the CFO explained, still sounding surprised. "Truth as a feature, not a bug. Risk officers are telling their boards, when TQS can admit this, they'll admit anything. That's the kind of transparency we need." Maxwell's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then stepped out to take the call. Ruth watched through the glass as his expression shifted. Confusion, then something like wonder. When he returned, he looked shaken. That was Adrian Voss, CEO of Helix Dynamics. Ruth knew the name. Helix was their biggest competitor, the company that had tried to poach their talent for years. "What did he want?" Gia asked. Maxwell sat down slowly. He said, "You admitted the math of your myth. I've spent 20 years building mine. I just wanted you to know that what you did, it keeps me up at night in a way losing market share never has." The room went quiet. "He's terrified," Ruth said softly. "Because when we can survive truth, what's his excuse for hiding it?" That afternoon, as the building emptied and the sun tracked west across Lake Michigan, Ruth found Maxwell in the protocol lab. He stood before the framed purple uniform, hands in his pockets, looking like a man still learning to carry weight he'd never noticed before. "Do you miss it?" he asked without turning. "The life that got stolen, the career you should have had?" Ruth considered the question, really considered it, letting herself feel the years that had been taken, the recognition that came too late, the time with Nate that she'd spent fighting for survival instead of just living. "I miss the years," she said finally, "but not the lesson." She moved beside him, looking at her own uniform behind glass. "When it had gone differently, when the VC hadn't erased me, when I'd built my own empire on that primitive, I might have become just like them. Too fast to see who I was stepping on." Maxwell nodded slowly. "I was like them." "You chose differently when it mattered," Ruth corrected. "That counts for something." "Does it count enough?" Ruth thought about Maria from Night Ops, now leading a security team. About Gia, 26, and directing an entire division. About universities teaching the Kelly Correction and clients choosing transparency over myth. "Ask me in another 7 years," she said, "when we can measure what we built, not just what we fixed." The sunlight tracked across their shoes. Ruth's practical flats, Maxwell's expensive leather that had lost its shine from actually walking the floors instead of being driven everywhere. The city beyond the windows continued its indifferent hum, millions of people building and breaking and rebuilding the world, one decision at a time. "The foundation got its first case yesterday," Ruth said. "A chemist in Boston. She developed a polymer synthesis process 5 years ago. The lab reassigned credit to the department head. She's been cleaning glassware ever since." "What are we doing?" "Everything we should have done for me," Ruth said. "Pro bono legal, evidence verification, public pressure. And when we can't get her credit, we get her enough money to start over on her own terms." Maxwell pulled out his phone and opened the company's employee directory. Hundreds of names, positions, faces. "How many others are in this building right now? People who did the work while someone else took the credit?" "I don't know," Ruth admitted, "but we're going to find out. And we're going to make it right." Here's the thing about justice. It doesn't happen by accident. It happens because people who've been wronged decide to fight. And people with power decide to listen. Comment "credit where it's due" below, and tag someone who deserves more recognition than they've gotten. The sun dropped below the skyline, washing the lab in golden light that turned everything soft and possible. The purple uniform behind glass looked different in this light, not a relic of invisibility, but proof that being seen could be survived. That daylight could be kinder than shadow when you stopped hiding from it. "We don't keep empires by guarding myths," Ruth said quietly, watching the light move across the walls like a promise. "We keep them by seeing who built the floor we stand on and letting daylight name them." Maxwell looked at her, this woman who'd saved his company by forcing him to see what he'd been standing on all along. "Think we can do it? Build something that lasts without stealing someone else's foundation?" Ruth smiled, tired but genuine. "I think we're about to find out." Outside, the city prepared for night. Inside, the lights of the Kelly Thompson Protocol lab stayed on, burning bright and visible from the street below. A beacon for anyone who'd ever been overlooked, erased, or told their brilliance belonged to someone else. The work wasn't finished. It might never be finished. But for the first time in 7 years, Ruth Kelly could see her own reflection in the glass without wondering who would steal it. And that, she decided, was enough to keep building on. Before you go, this story matters because somewhere right now, someone's work is being stolen. Someone's name is being erased. Someone's brilliance is being attributed to the person with the bigger office. Comment below. Have you ever been Ruth? Have you ever been Maxwell, benefiting from something you didn't build? Real talk only. And subscribe because we're just getting started on stories that expose how power really works.